Guys, today I'm joined by one of the best instructors in the world, potentially the best in my humble opinion, and one of the leading eye doctors to do with sports vision in the world. And today we're going to be discussing something that's come up recently over the last few weeks with me at least multiple times, and I presume with you multiple times: instinctive shooting. A lot of people say, I see it, shoot it, I just get in and I just shoot it. You've taught me that that's not a good thing, potentially.
As with many things, it is and isn't, so it's understanding when it's a valid tool to use and also when it's not. So there are going to be certain styles of target which are inherently more suited to being instinctive, so a little bit more reactionary, shorter sight pictures, shorter windows. But there's also stuff where if you're trying to employ that technique, you'll probably be shortchanging yourself and you'll find it quite hard to get any consistency with your results. So,
does instinctive mean no plan? I suppose something that in my head, that's what people mean. I'm an instinctive shooter. I just do
not
my
necessarily.
thing.
I think where it's my take on it is where people sort of try and heighten the reliance on hand-to-eye coordination, which I said for certain birds is a very, very effective way of shooting. Mm-hmm. But there's just as many birds where it's not, and some of the bigger lead pictures and the slightly more technical sight picture shots, they aren't necessarily. They don't look like they make sense to people straight off. You have to. It's a learned, placed shot, and this is where just going on instinct and letting your hand and eye coordination take you to a spot is fine when looking at the target is good enough. Because if your gun shoots where you look at the target, that's where the shot goes. But if you need to be looking into a space or understanding a relationship between a gun and a target which isn't putting the 2 points together, that's where it can kind of fall apart.
It's fair to say then, I suppose, instinctive shooting has a cap on how many you'll go. If you go out and just shoot, there's a cap on what you'll ever achieve.
Yeah, I mean, depends obviously on the targets that you're set. If your local club, for example, shoots a lot of quartering away, tight angles and incoming shots, which will always take a shorter lead, then shooting as a more instinctive shooter will probably be able to get you to a reasonably high level, certainly percentage-wise. It will, however, mean that you've kind of built your game up almost by learning one shot. It's like learning to play golf with a 7-iron. You could get to a decent level just with playing with a 7-iron. But in reality, if you want to go on to a proper 18-hole course, you need to be comfortable with a driver, a 7-iron, a putter and a sand wedge. They've all got their place, and it's the same thing with shooting.
Ed, from an eye perspective, one presumes instinctive shooting requires good vision, and so that will deteriorate with age. Is that a young person's game?
Yeah, it certainly can do. I think there's going to be a correlation between having really good visual acuity and having good reaction time, and making sure that you have got an ideal pairing between your hand and your eye dominance. So there's interesting anecdotal reports from people who say that they can cure eye dominance problems just by shooting instinctively and shooting faster. And what we've got to try and unpack and understand is when someone says that they are shooting instinctively, what do they actually mean? Do they mean that they're just randomly throwing the gun around when the target comes out and connecting a few times? So if they connect 2 pairs out of 8, they've shot instinctively, but have they shot instinctively to a repeatable, reproducible standard? And that's where we've sometimes found mutual clients who are struggling, say that they can shoot very, very instinctively, but when we actually take them onto a ground and have a look at some targets, it turns out that maybe they can't. What that might mean is they can dust 1 pair, but then the rest of the stand is messy, or it's not a reproducible thing. And I think
a lot of that is that game shooters coming into clay shooting.
Yeah, I think there's some of that, and I think there's also clay shooters who potentially just shoot at a home ground and they become familiar with the targets. They understand where the target's coming from. They know where it's going to fall, and it's the sort of target that they could potentially shoot with their eyes closed or the gun over the head. It doesn't necessarily mean that shooting instinctively is then going to transition to bigger, more technical targets, as you said. And I think as people get a little bit older, their hand-eye coordination and their reaction time can start to deteriorate, and then that's why we end up with people making sort of wild swings around the sky. And sometimes you'll connect, but it's
not proof of concept.
It's not proof of concept, no, and it's a slightly random methodology.
You can train hand-eye coordination and timing, though, correct?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. So the Americans are a lot further ahead of us in the UK than with the sports vision training side of things. But if you've got somebody who does struggle with some spatial awareness aspects, they struggle with hand dominance and things like that, then it's definitely a trainable thing.
Hand dominance is a very deep hole I'd like to dig into.
Yeah, yeah.
Eye dominance is something that we're going to talk about later.
We are
Hand
indeed.
dominance.
Yeah, it is a trainable thing, and that's something I do work with athletes from lots of different sports on, trying to improve people's hand-eye coordination and just optimization of certain visual skill sets.
Something you can do at home?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, you can. And this is one of the things where people make a miscorrelation of shooting and eye dominance is just like catching a ball. It's nothing like catching a ball.
I'm really bad at catching balls.
Yeah,
So,
and
yeah.
catching a ball, it's coming in towards your spatial area. When we're shooting, it's completely the opposite. You're shooting a, what's the term?
Projectile?
Yeah, no,
you're shooting a cloud of small
exponentially
pellets,
more
yeah.
complicated thing. So something that's coming in towards you is easier.
And you use your hands quite regularly,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Whereas shooting is a totally different game. So it's not a correlation that works. But from a training perspective, there are certain things that we can do from eye muscle behaviour, visual cortex work, where we can improve that person's skill set.
This is lovely weather. So I suppose the highlight really is, if you are an instinctive shot, you don't need to completely destroy what you're doing. You could train to be a better instinctive shot, or is the real bottom line, learn to shoot better with less instinct?
It's probably a little bit of both. You can obviously, Ed can fine-tune people. If you're a prescription wearer like yourself or me, you can fine-tune, or Ed can fine-tune the prescription down to sort of get every last bit of acuity out of you that is possible, which is always going to help. The real answer is to do that and to then work on the weaker areas of your game. So for example, if you're a very good instinctive shot, you'll find there's certain targets where you are very good at, and that's fine. The targets that you're not very good at, rather than trying to continue to shoot them instinctively, you probably need to learn a little bit more of a method, a bit more barrel awareness, a bit
Get
more of a
another golf
place
club.
shot, and kind of fill the gaps in your game. So it's a technical approach and a visual approach. Both of them can have advantages, should we say.
Is instinctive shooting swing through, generally speaking? It could be anything, it's just a word.
I think from what I see, the people that I see and that tend to sort of come up with it they do all sorts, really. It's gun up, pull the trigger somewhere, and sometimes it connects and sometimes it doesn't, and that's kind of the whole point, is that you will connect with targets doing all sorts of stuff wrong. But if you can't repeat it, or it's not a consistent base to work from, then it's no good. You know, it's not proof of concept to be able to go, oh, see, I just hit that pair. Well, hit that pair the same way 4 times in a row, and you might have some sort of you might have a leg to stand on. But if it's just a case of, if you fire enough pellets, something runs into something, that's always true, as we found out at 150 yards. Shoot a few shots, eventually something's going to break. Doesn't mean it's perfect. It meant it worked in that particular instance at that particular time.
This is lovely weather. Might I suggest we go and find some instinctive targets? Or maybe we could shoot, I don't know, can you just, I presume shooting instinctively is just as it sounds, as we've all done, just see it, shoot it, bang.
Yeah, we can come round the course. This is a new course. We've just come to stand 1. Shoot a couple of targets here, and this is, for example, the second bird here is something I think you could argue that you could shoot reasonably instinctively. It's a short lead overhead quartering target. I would see just off the bottom left-hand corner. I think you could just get away with putting the gun up and pulling the trigger. The first shot for me would need to be a little more measured, because it's a bit further out, bit wider angled, doing a couple of different things. It could be a bit of an experiment, just go and shoot a few stands blind and see what happens. It's not saying we won't be able to go on and hit them, because I'm fairly certain we will, but it's how consistent is what we're doing going to be in the long run.
And then instinctive shooting is gun down, generally speaking? Do you
Generally speaking, yeah.
So he's more of a training for hunting kind of concept.
Yeah, you do hear sort of more of the game shooting lads come out with it. And yeah, I love game shooting, as you well know. The problem with it is, the fact with it is there's no scoring involved. So someone who is perceived to be a very good game shot,
to themselves, if nothing else.
Yeah, if we all do it. You tend to remember the good stuff rather than the bad stuff. When you shoot in a competition, there's a scorecard, and that is kind of
very telling, because everyone else has a scorecard too.
Yeah, you could say, okay, I shot 60%, 70%, 80%, 90%. That's quite finite. You can look at that, and it's a quantitative thing, and you can say, right, that is what I've done today. Whereas you could have someone say, oh no, I've a pretty good game shot. Well, some of the high bird shoots, a pretty good game shot will be shooting 6 to 1. Well,
if you did that on clays,
you'd be on suicide watch, wouldn't you? So it's relative.
It's happened.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen it. But yeah, that's maybe that's the way we look at it.
Right, after you.
Well, so the second target is something where you can just push into, whereas the first one I kind of feel like I need to draw a little bit of a line through it is I'm opening up a couple of foot. It's a slight incline target. It's not just a case of going to a spot and shooting.
Gone a day to shoot it badly. From a gun down position.
Hold my beer. So yeah, let's do just that.
I mean, he is at tolerance.
It's doable, but it's the whole thing of if you had to do 4 pairs, 5 pairs, and your life depended on it, which shot would you choose? For me, it'd be the pair, gun up, in the first target a little bit longer. It doesn't really detract from the second bird in my view there, because that's a bird that kind of suits a shorter, punchier move. But this is the whole point. There's going to be instances where it does kind of work, and there's going to be instances where it kind of doesn't work, and there'll also be instances where it doesn't work. If you combine the difference between that and a slightly more measured, longer connection with the target in the gun, pull, you could go in and your first pair of doing it, as we did, breaks, you go, see, it works. It did, but it's kind of like rolling dice. You'll get the numbers sometimes.
If you haven't got a plan, it's better supposed to shoot instinctively than to just...
Yeah, if you've just got to turn up and
anything, yeah.
you've just got to turn up and shoot, it's kind of, it is what it is. You've got to make the best of what you've got. But shooting clays isn't just turning up and shooting. Sporting clays is about being able to do something and then repeat it. It's trying to maximise your sort of chance of hitting the target rather than just going, that will do. Because you saw the first pair, it broke fine. But then
Very
you've got to do it
impressive.
again and again and again.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've found with people who talk about instinctive shooting is it's on targets where they don't know they're coming from. So it'll be really interesting if we go and shoot some targets without seeing a pair and just punch into targets that come out. And as we said, that does very much dictate on being able to see that target quickly and get on it as early as you possibly can. And for me, if and whenever I've tried the instinctive shooting method, it generally tends to be a swing through technique that I put in. But then when that catches me out is if there's a fast target that I can get away with and shoot it almost like a trap bird, then I'm slightly uncontrolled with the second one. So I think if you've only got one tool in your toolbox, it's going to be difficult.
All right, shall we go and find a stand we've not shot?
Oh yeah, let's go and find many.
All right, we've got a stand. We don't know where the birds are coming from, and Ed and I are going to shoot a pair completely instinctively.
Absolutely.
A followed by
An A followed by B. Why
Okay.
not?
I'll turn my back, so it's properly instinctive.
Should I also turn my back so I'm not watching and you can just...
I mean, it's going to be horrific, but
That's fine.
pull. It wasn't pretty,
But it worked.
effective.
but yeah.
That's
Said I
it.
wouldn't bet my life on it.
At the end of the day, this is it. Like we said on the last one, it's not that it won't work, it's that how consistently would it work?
Nice.
For me, I wouldn't say I shot them particularly instinctively purely because there was a bit of time. If they looked like they were getting away, I'd have probably attacked them a bit more. But once I saw that line was actually coming up and in towards us, for me it made sense, which I don't know whether you shot them late or whether you shot them early.
I shot them relatively late.
Yeah,
it's plenty
same
of
to me,
time.
because gives you more time and it's getting closer. If they were angled, I think they're middies, if they were angled out so they're quartered away as opposed to quartering in, that'd be a target I would then try and shoot probably a bit more instinctively to get it shot before it gets away from me.
You can sometimes shoot the first pair instinctively because you're applying a method, and then that person is almost shooting in that sort of subconscious manner, and then they try and repeat the picture that they saw.
Yep.
So it then changes the cadence and the time.
How often do you hear, I always hit the first pair?
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's sort of an interesting thing from my perspective, that person then changes almost their mindset. So they've shot instinctively and smoothly, and then they've tried to then repeat that picture, and whether that has generated more barrel watching, whether that's meant that they've lost some of their timing, they're shooting it earlier, or they're hanging on and shooting later. I found that quite fascinating because it's a topic that comes up in the sports consultations.
Yep.
That people do that.
My take on that from how I see it more often than not is it's almost a little bit of a get out of jail free card, but it's kind of like almost people not wanting to accept that they've got some technical limitations. And over the course of 8, 10, 12, 16, 20 targets, it kind of shows where you are in reality versus a first pair gone.
It's interesting that you say that. I think a lot of it is also that people maybe don't even understand that there's technical things to understand, because there are instructors out there who purport that you can just instinctively shoot 100 out of 100.
Yeah.
And so I think that perhaps it's also ignorance, not willful ignorance, it's just complete ignorance.
Unawareness of some of the variables that you could be changing without realising that you're changing them, which I think is kind of what Ed was coming on to there. And at the end of the day, like we said, you can hit a pair of targets with very, very poor shooting. It doesn't mean that it's going to work again. It just means that on that pair it worked. And just because you can get away with something suboptimal doesn't mean that you should look to try and repeat something suboptimal. So a suboptimal method might be shooting really, really fast and instinctive on something, and it works for a pair of targets. But time is kind of going to be the acid test, and if over 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pairs, whatever, 100 targets, that's where you're going to see the real efficiency of the method. That's my kind of take on it.
I think one of the things that would be interesting if we shoot this again, now we know where the targets are coming from, is the repeatability and the quality of the kills.
Yep.
Because I think from my perspective going into that, I thought, I don't really know where the targets are coming from, so I was aware I was a bit more up for it because it was a bit of a challenge, and whether through 2 pairs, 3 pairs, 4 pairs, 5 pairs, sometimes a little bit of complacency comes in, or people start to just approach it with a different mindset.
Yep.
And again, from your competitive perspective, when you were doing some of your mental training, how to then get from that ready state into green light go.
Yep.
And whether there's a difference between how instinctive shooters do that and sort of almost harness that anticipation, those sort of circuits, and whether that kind of then bleeds off when it becomes a non-repeatable technique.
Very interesting. On a quick sideline, do you think fit ask is inherently more instinctive or not the slightest?
Not really.
Because you're forced to shoot gun down.
Yeah, obviously you've got the gun down thing, and you don't have to have the repeatability of pair dead, pair dead, pair dead on the same targets. I think if you've done your groundwork in sporting, so you've kind of learnt your trade in sporting and you've got consistent at building pairs up, you build a big score in fit ask by shooting your pairs. You can get away with, some of them, I can't remember how many targets you're meant to be shooting on 100 at full use, but obviously you've got a fair bit of room for manoeuvre with not quite being right with a single target full use. You make your score in the pairs section. And where do you get really good at shooting pairs? English sporting, because it makes you shoot the pair the right way, because you've got to get 3, 4, 5 of them in a row.
Yeah.
So it trains you in a way to, I think, technically and mentally approach the targets correctly. Because what you can do is a lot of time in fit ask, people say, I shoot the singles all right, but I really struggle in the pairs. And that's another great example. They'll have shells in the gun, they'll put the gun up, pull the trigger a couple of times, they will break targets because you've got 2 shots and you've got a level of competency. But then you come to the stage where now you've got to do this again as part of a pair and you've only got 1 shot. Do you try and repeat the risky, shitty shot that you took with your first barrel in a single, which is obviously a risk, or do you try the other risky strategy, which is shooting it a different way to how you broke it in the single, but with a, quote, better shot? Either way, you're introducing a lot of variables, whereas if you went into it, in my mind, with the view of making your first shot in the singles your best possible shot, and then using your second barrel as a kind of get out of jail free card, if you break that first barrel correctly, you then don't need to change any variables for your pairs, because you've already broke that target the right way in the right place, which should theoretically be much easier to do again.
What are you doing there, Ed?
So I'm now
Trying to shoot instinctively.
I'm almost now trying to make myself shoot instinctively. Does that make sense? I'm now trying to do something different,
which is inherently not what you've done for 15
for me
years. Yeah.
not right or comfortable or suits the target. So it's workable, and I would dare say have another pair and I can go, right, I can make this work. But you can make anything work to an extent, as in you can break targets doing it. The acid test is always going to be, if you had to shoot this pair 50 times or 100 times or 1,000 times, which way is going to put the most kills on your card and the most consistently. So trying to, in my mind, shoot a target wrong because you can doesn't make sense. We could probably get those shot 40 yards further out and just chop them off, and it look really, really cool. But then you've got to do it again and again and again, and it comes down to that just putting the shot in the right place for an absolute split second of time. Whereas if you try and give yourself a bigger margin for error, it's going to work better because you're not always going to be perfect.
Is instinctive and see it, shoot it the same thing, or am I misreading that?
I guess it's probably a different way of explaining the same thing would be my understanding.
Yeah.
I suppose really what you need to do is get somebody who claims to shoot that way.
And actually have a good analyse.
And take them out, have a shot with them, see how they perceive things. This is what I'd normally do, this is what I'd normally do, and whether we get there, of course I wouldn't normally have missed that target.
Usually shoot 8 out of 8 of those, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing that you do. We've seen that with numerous people where we've had joint sessions where we've had to do visual work and coaching work, where it combines with eye dominance issues and this kind of stuff. And sometimes people are misinterpreting the problems. They think, oh, I've got an eye dominance problem and this is why I'm no good on this target. You haven't got an eye dominance problem and you're no good on this target because you're shooting it wrong, or your reading of the bird is completely wrong, or you have a misunderstanding of some of the fundamentals of what you're doing. And that's kind of comes on to something we'll maybe touch on later about fault finding and actually recognising sometimes it's you, and a lot of times people don't necessarily like to hear that. It's much better to go, oh yeah, your glasses definitely aren't right, so that'll make you better.
My gun's not right.
Oh yeah, you've got your eye dominance. That's the only reason you're not in the England team. Where a lot of the time it's just going, you've got some fundamental flaws. Everybody has them, but you've then got to recognise them, accept them, to deal with them, rather than just, obviously present company accepted. 3 perfect specimens. Recognise your flaws and then you can deal with them, because until you recognise you've got a problem with something, you're unlikely to stumble across the answer.
Yeah.
And when someone can say to you, okay, visually you're strong or weak, for example, so if you yourself need a prescription, we deal with that first, get prescription glasses, make sure you can see everything clearly. Then if there's any underlying technique issues, you can then start dealing with those one at a time, rather than just saying, oh, well, this is all not working because. It can be something as simple as that, and you, for yourself, Ed's dealt with several customers where their prescription's just been terrible. So
and that is their effort of a magic bullet.
Ed has made that better, and instantly they're like, wow, this is suddenly so much easier and better, because obviously if they're shooting off the right shoulder and the right eye's been seeing poorly and the left eye's been seeing well, that then creates an eye dominance issue, which is not actually an eye dominance issue per se. It's just someone's not done a very good job in making their glasses or their contacts, or they haven't bothered or whatever, and dealing with that has made a lot of problems go away. So sometimes it is a simple case of, this is why this isn't working, but it's very rarely just a black and white, one or the other.
All right, so instinctive shooting is bollocks, in short, potentially.
It's bollocks to try and use it all the time, because I don't know what we've got as we go around the next few stands. There'll be obviously certain targets where you can go, it's fine, this will be okay. Yep. And you could probably shoot 3, 4, 5 pairs that way and have no problem. But then you'll also come to something and just go, I know, for example, there's a Batu down on my coaching stand, which you could probably throw 100 of them for somebody and just say, just shoot it instinctively, just look at the target and move away from it, pull the trigger. And unless you have somebody telling you that you're going to need to basically be getting 20 foot down to the sort of 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock line of it and stretching away and seeing this kind of picture, they won't figure it out for themselves unless they're very, very capable shooters already, in which case they will probably not be shooting that target pure on instinct, because it is not an instinctive shot. You've seen the gaps on some of the stuff we were shooting earlier on. It isn't instinctive.
No.
It's very, very not instinctive.
So that was more of an instinctive.
That felt more like an instinctive
technique, and a decent kill on the first one, and then too much gun speed, not enough control, and just essentially chucking some lead in the sky and hoping that something was going to break. And the first 2 were great, and then that's where I've started to think about it in a slightly different way, and the errors are starting to creep in.
So do 2 or 3 more pairs just like that. So literally not trying to slow you down or shoot any different. Just go through, still pushing the gun real hard, real aggressive. You will get to the stage where you can break this semi-regularly for sure. Here's another question / problem. Do you have a feeling where you're missing?
At the moment, no.
Chicken and egg sort of a thing. Your gun's moving so fast that it's going to be incredibly hard for you to actually pinpoint what's happening, why it's not working.
I presume it's hard for you as an instructor.
It's harder, I tell you, you're miles in front. Because your gun's going so fast, it's building so much speed, so much lead into the shot that you're not seeing. All of these problems would be removed by taking your time, slowing down, bit more barrel awareness, and actually seeing a slow, steady gap moving into a foot 18 inches off the front edge of the target. Plenty of time. Have a go, see what you think. Still too much. So slow. Still too much.
From my shooting style instinctively, it's just fast and not controlled, and then that kind of just bleeds into other stands where I'm sort of going in with that same pace. And I think what we found again is sometimes your instinctive shooter is the sort of person who says they don't see lead, they don't really see forward allowance, and I'm not seeing any lead there. I'm just sort of seeing a target, trying to get into it with reaction time.
Yeah, timing it in.
And timing it in, which, as you said, then doesn't give you any real analysis of, well, I know I was in front of that, or I know I was over the top, or my line wasn't quite right, which makes it more difficult to then correct.
All you can do is slow your gun down or speed it up and hope that magic happens.
So just do a couple more pairs, trying to make you progressively less hurried and panicked. Matching the speed of the target, staying with the bird, almost playing this in what your brain would say is slow motion.
Nice breaks.
Much more of a controlled, repeatable move. Could you describe to me what you saw there? So if Johnny said to you, Ed, how did you shoot that? What did you give it? What would your answer be?
So from that, shooting it with a more controlled style, I could see the line, because I think beforehand it was easy to throw gun speed at it and go over the top as well as being in front, whereas with that I could almost visualise where it was going to go, and I could sort of draw that, match the speed, draw the line out, and you know, it doesn't need that much. I was finding 2 feet, something like that.
Couple of foot, 18 inches, 2 foot, perfect. But by shooting it with a more controlled, measured style, A, it's easier to understand when it's wrong, why it's wrong, but B, when it's right, it then becomes much more obvious, and then hopefully becomes easier to repeat. Whereas you say you hit a pair of targets and go, oh, that was good. And again, going back to the game shooting thing, we've all done it and we've all seen people do it. Bring down an absolutely storming bird, and you know as well as they do, they've got no clue what's just happened, and they won't ever do it again. It was
a great good when it happens.
It was a great shot in isolation, but great shots in isolation for this are useless, because the whole game is based around building a score and consistency.
Is measuring the antithesis to instinctive shooting?
I would guess so, yeah. Because there's loads of times people say, don't measure it out, don't measure it out. There are certain shots where that is exactly what you have to do. Obviously, as you get more competent and you train the movements, you'll be less consciously aware of measuring out
but it's happening.
3 foot, 4 foot, 5 foot. But when you're starting to apply these progressively bigger leads, which is again why I said when you shoot the bigger lead targets, for me, they become less suited to the more instinctive way of shooting. This is a much more understandable, safer way of doing things, because you are learning a relationship between the 2 points. When it's good, you can repeat it. When it's bad, you can adjust it. Whereas just if it was as simple as everybody look at the target, mount your gun and pull the trigger, would I have a job? No. Well,
you'd be a great teacher.
I mean, don't get me wrong, the porn industry is obviously calling. Yeah. You could shoot something with a really terrible shot and just not be able to repeat it. Well, it's no good. This stuff where you've got to get, and these aren't big targets, but again, for me, these are targets that are more suited to being slower and more controlled. When you start getting something where you have to get 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 feet in front of, if it was as simple as just looking at the bird and pulling the trigger, why can't we get somebody who's never shot a gun or almost never shot a gun and just go, here you go, mate, mount this up, look at that target, pull the trigger, and your brain will work it out. And the reason it doesn't work is it's a load of... It doesn't happen. Because, I could then get my mum to say, oh, mum, there's a 70-yard Batu out there. All you've got to do is just pop a shell in here, close it up, just look at the target, don't worry, your brain will fix it. Really? Does anyone believe that? If it was a straight incomer or a straight going away, which involved putting, 2 points together, the whole catching a ball analogy, completely. That's what that is. That's where that catching a ball analogy.
That's why everyone starts shooting those targets.
and that's why you see you'll get people who maybe do some corporate instruction. Just look at the clay, look at the clay. That's good enough. But as you get to other slightly more complicated stuff, in my mind, it's not good enough. So it'll be interesting. And Ed, who's someone I would say is quite because Ed shot a lot of trap, so quite a lot of fast trap. He's got quite a a sort of aggressive swing through shot is your kind of go-to, isn't it?
Yep.
And that's something, again, there are lots of instances where that style of shooting is a hindrance. So it's then working away from that and saying, okay, we could look at under these circumstances, not changing your whole game, but for these targets in these particular circumstances, a different shot would make it easier.
Yep.
You look at all the courses that you shoot, you will not be able to shoot most of them just relying on one style of shooting. You should be able to chop and change your methods and your shots depending on what's in front of you. If you're shooting trap and skeet, that's something different because you're always faced with a fixed trajectory. You know, skeet, peg 2 is always high 2 is going to be killed there, whole point here, this
You
speed,
can rely
this
on your
picture.
body mechanics to just
You
make it
can
happen.
just learn the move, go to a spot. Obviously not quite as easy as that, but the principles out of the same. You can't really do that with sporting because there's an infinite combination of variables.
All right, another
Yeah.
stand.
Yeah, new standard.
Yes, that second target is not an instinctive bird, is
It's,
it?
yeah, it's not to say that you can't shoot it instinctively and kill it for sure, but it kind of shows you that it's very hard to do consistently.
Where's that?
So the first bird, no problem. Bit of gun speed, past the front edge,
Yeah.
pull the trigger, great. That is the sort of shot that suits that style of shooting.
It's totally acceptable to shoot that way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Worked
by
well.
all means,
Yeah,
crack
felt
on,
good.
works well, consistent, no problem. It's the right tool for the job. The second one, that for me needs to be much more placed, considered, stretched out shot.
A very complex piece of lead.
Yeah, there's 2 or 3 things going on there, and you need to understand what they are and basically engineer the shot into a certain point. That is going to be understanding the relationship between the target and the barrel and how those 2 points interact. So that's going to be where you think of shooting as a pull away shot. You start near the bird and you stretch your way progressively over space, 2 foot, 4 foot, 6 foot, bang down at the 8 o'clock side rather than just trying to
Stab.
rip through. You
Yeah.
will get there, but you will not get there consistently.
Yeah, you'll
So-
hit 1 out of 4, 2 out of 4
yeah,
or something.
so
which is,
and that was a good example. You know, 3 pairs, you hit one of them just counts, 1 out of 3.
yeah, you
shows
wouldn't walk
it
off feeling
breaks.
bad. It's a harder bird.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, you don't mind missing a few of those, but I think by getting you to shoot it another way,
Yeah, the way
you
that
will
I probably
break
naturally
more of them.
would.
Therefore, you can start mixing up your more instinctive shots with your more measured place shots, and you end up better up overall. So should we shoot some of those batus?
All right, let's see what we can do.
So if you're killing it here, we're going to come just over halfway back because you don't get to see it particularly early. Talking about here,
Yep.
eyes off to the right, start near the target, and it's going to be a nice, long, smooth stretch to this sort of 8 o'clock line. Whether you see it as 4 foot, 6 foot, doesn't matter.
Yeah,
I'm more
ballpark,
interested in how you generate that gap, so moving away from the target gradually, rather than just trying to punch into a spot or rip through it from the back with no control. Brilliant, perfect shot.
Pull. Totally uninstinctive in every way.
But a pair where you could say both options are legit on the right target. First target, more of an instinctive shot, bit of gun speed, bit of hand-to-eye coordination, perfect. Second one, no.
And this is where good decision making, good plans, and
Yeah.
a good mental game to be able to, as you said, cut off after the first shot, one style and implement another. It's very hard. Is that something you would do, or would you try and?
Yeah, no, you've got to get used to essentially changing gears through a pair because you've got one very different tempo and tool on the first target and one very different tempo and tool on the second target. So you can't just go in with, I shoot instinctively or I shoot slow or I shoot quick. Your job as a shooter is to look at what's in front of you, open your toolbox up before you go in and go, right, target 1 is going to get this shot, this approach, target 2 is going to get this shot, this approach, and then put the 2 together.
Pull.
Nice.
Very hard mental switch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Measuring it out. And
You lock your left
watching
arm
down
in,
your
yeah.
watching down your gun, and hopefully Sasha will have got that on the video there. The second shot looks like you are measuring it out. You know, it is okay now. The first shot doesn't, because you're not.
Well, there's a bit more hand speed in that first shot. You
Yeah,
can
it's just
kind of
that's,
whack it.
that's closer to the catching a ball analogy. That's the
Yeah.
hand-to-eye coordination. Look at the bird, let your gun speed do the work. Perfect. But gun
Second,
speed's not going
lock
to do the
in,
work.
plenty
on
of
the second.
core work, very measured. You place the shot.
Yeah.
And you would opt, when it comes to shooting pheasants or
Yeah.
game, to implement more slow methodology into the shooting there.
Depends what you're shooting. So if you were shooting big high stuff, Yeah, because you see it coming for a long time. It's well up there. It's kind of like, not really like shooting that Batu, but shooting a big, long target. You're not really, it's not like shooting grouse where it's very much hand speed and reaction, you know, short, punchy moves. That is much more of an instinctive thing. Shooting partridges, popping over hedgerows and flushing, that's going to be a bit more instinctive. But also, again, the shots are more suited to an instinctive way of shooting because the lead pitches are smaller. When you get these bigger, more complicated leads, you've got a pheasant coming off the top of a mountain, sort of 250 yards in front of you, and it's hitting the wind and gliding and sliding and dropping and all sorts of stuff. Just putting the gun up and pulling the trigger is
having good eyes, looking at the target, the bird in this instance, reading a line, reading speed, and actually putting that into a planned
watching it
shot.
come, and as you see it probably 100 yards away, you're going to be thinking, okay, foot position, body position, that's going to be breaking over my left side. As it comes in, okay, yeah, that's the line of the bird, opening it up, bang, seeing where that shot went, and then readjusting, rather than just, if you're shooting pheasants, you know, in a little gap in the trees and they're being flushed through a wood and it's this snap shooting and everyone goes, I'm much better at snap shooting. Well, you're probably much better at it because the pheasants are 10 yards away and they don't take anything doing with them. Then when you go up and you're starting to see them getting flushed off higher points and you can see them coming from a long time, it's probably they're higher and more technical. That's why you find it harder, not because people have almost looked at the correlation being wrong. They go, I shoot really well in a wood where I've just got a short window. It's because the pheasants, they're on the end of your gun. You'll hit more of them. A tealy going away bird from behind that hedge. It's a fair old distance going up and away. And then a left to right off that machine there. Plenty of space, plenty of sky.
Plenty of instinct. Nice second.
So try the first target. Start your hold point slightly higher up.
It's a really tricky target to work out. That.
Yeah, so you're over the top of the bird now, just so you know.
Really?
Yep. Shot.
I really had to be very barrel aware of that, which is really interesting.
You're about to get absolutely flogged on the internet for saying something like that.
Yeah, pure eyes on target for me meant that I couldn't control the barrel as well as I wanted to.
Because you didn't know where they were.
And it felt as though it was just, as you said, ripping over the top.
Yep.
Whereas having a proportion of bead awareness.
And that's the difference. It's not saying you're looking at the gun.
Absolutely not. No, very much
It's being more aware of where it is. And this is something I think people take out of context and go, oh, what barrel? I don't even see the barrel. Of course you do. But the fact is you can split your attention to an extent on certain targets. And there's, without putting words in your mouth, Johnny, that last stand, that quartering bird, I would imagine very, very little barrel awareness, just looking at the bird and hand speed.
And if I had to sort of quantify that, and I know these are just very arbitrary figures, from sort of being 90% target focused and the outcome was very random, to being sort of 60-40, having more awareness of where that bead is going to be, that just helped me
more
be
carefully
more
placing your shot.
Yeah. Well, you've just done the last 6 of those on the bounce, which didn't look like you were going to do that to start with.
Absolutely not, because it just sort of gave me more control. And I think with that sort of target trajectory that is reasonably far away and going further out, line is very important.
Yeah, that's a hard bird. There's a lot of stuff going on with that. Out of interest, shoot a couple of the crossers, and what you've just said about that split between barrel awareness and target awareness, or target focus, just try the same thing, take your time, and just see how that pans out for you.
Very nice breaks.
So that is more eyes on target and more peripheral awareness of the barrel, but I've still got a really good peripheral awareness of it, but it's a totally different visual picture from that bird to that bird about where I'm placing the shot.
Yeah, and that's going to be a much tighter relationship on that target between the gun and the clay, because it's a smaller volume of lead that you're having to work out into a space, which from back here I would probably class as about 3-4 foot.
Yeah.
Whether that's what you see it as or not. But again, that's just a really interesting one for someone, not in layman's terms, because you're not a layman, but you've got a lot more background shooting trap than sporting. So these bigger sight pictures don't always feel comfortable for you, do they? They don't always make sense. Whereas now, when I've said you're trying to slow down, be a little bit more controlled, a bit more measured, now by just shifting your percentage of focus, if you like, from how much is on the clay, how much is of barrel awareness, and kind of balancing the two, that has obviously worked well for you, but it looks from back here much more controlled and steady, which on those particular targets is exactly what we're trying to go for.
It's interesting how you relate it in percentage of barrel awareness, and I suppose that you could almost implement a percentage of intuitive shooting.
Yeah,
Well, thank you both very much.
it's been a pleasure as always.
That was fascinating.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching, guys. This channel is made possible by our amazing sponsors. You can find out more about them in the description down below. And if you want to support the channel, you can join as a member. You get loads of extra content, well, some extra content, and occasionally we hook up and go clay shooting together as a membership group. If you don't feel like joining today, we really appreciate you watching and subscribing. Have a wonderful day.